The late afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows of the St. Helena Chapel, scattering soft blues and golds across the aisle. I am Elias, 29 years old, and this was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, a day surrounded by laughter, love, and the people who raised me. But not a single one of them came. Not my parents, not my sister, not even Matt, the friend who once swore he'd stand beside me forever. Instead, they were sipping champagne 200 miles away in Napa Valley at my sister's engagement party, a party she planned 8 months after knowing my wedding date. And my family, without hesitation, chose her. My heels clicked against the polished hardwood floor as I stepped in bouquet, trembling slightly in my hands. The air smelled faintly of lilies and old oak, the kind of scent that usually brought comfort. Today it felt heavy, almost suffocating. I let my eyes travel, searching for something familiar, something safe, and then my gaze caught the rows on the left. The seats meant for my family were empty. Completely, utterly empty. My chest tightened so sharply, I thought for a second I might stop breathing. Not my parents, not my cousins, not even Aunt Margie, who had never missed a milestone in my life. A wave of cold swept over me, starting at my neck and rolling down my spine. I kept moving slow and deliberate, feeling every step, as if I were walking through water. Behind the music and the murmur of guests, I could hear a few whispers, the rustle of heads turning toward those empty seats. It was like a spotlight had been thrown on the absence, making it impossible to pretend I didn't see it. As I reached the halfway point of the aisle, I caught sight of Rachel, an old college friend, sitting near the middle row. She leaned ever so slightly toward the aisle, her lips barely moving as she murmured low enough for only me to hear. "They're in Napa Valley, at Olivia's engagement party." The words landed like glass shards in my stomach. For a moment I thought I'd misheard, that maybe she'd said something else, anything else, but her eyes told me she meant every syllable. I kept my head high, the way my grandmother used to tell me when life tried to push me down. "Smile for the pictures," she would say. "They last longer than the hurt." So I smiled. Not because I felt joy, but because it was the only armor I had left. My hands tightened around the bouquet fingers, pressing into the stems, until I could feel the moisture seep onto my palms. When I reached the altar, Noah was there waiting. His eyes softened as he saw mine, and I knew he could read every unspoken word. The officiant began speaking, but the sound was muffled in my ears, like hearing through a closed door. My mind kept flashing to images of my mother in a shimmering dress holding a champagne flute, laughing beside Olivia under strings of fairy lights. I imagined my father standing somewhere near the bar, nodding approvingly as guests congratulated them for the beautiful couple they had chosen to celebrate. My wedding day didn't even make their list. I tried to focus on Noah's hands as he took mine. Warm, steady grounding. The vows we had written ourselves were tucked safely in the best man's pocket, and I knew when it was my turn to speak, my voice would have to carry without faltering. But inside, the questions screamed. When had I become so disposable to them? Was there a moment, a decision that had made it easier for them to choose Olivia over me again? Or had it always been this way, and I had just been too naive to see it? Applause broke out after the officiant pronounced us husband and wife. The sound was polite, cheerful even, but to me it felt like a performance for a crowd missing its most important cast members. Noah kissed me softly, and I held on a fraction longer than necessary, not for the romance, but for the anchor. Cameras flashed, the organ swelled, and we began the walk back down the aisle together. I caught glimpses of friends, beaming strangers smiling warmly, and in every gap between them, the hollow reminder of who wasn't there. Outside, the air was cooler, the faint smell of grapevines drifting in from the hills beyond the chapel. Guests spilled out behind us, clinking glasses of sparkling cider, offering congratulations. I returned each with a polite nod, a practice thank you. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I didn't need to check to know it wouldn't be from my parents. Still, I glanced. A message from my cousin Lila blinked on the screen. Saw pics from Napa. Olivia's party looks insane. Sorry they're missing yours. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, then I locked the screen without replying. The photographer called us over for portraits near the stone archway. Noah brushed a strand of hair from my face and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded, because what else was there to say? That my family had chosen champagne toasts and a vineyard backdrop over witnessing my vows. That part of me wanted to turn this entire day into proof that I didn't need them, even though the empty space inside me screamed. Otherwise, I held my pose, let the camera capture a version of me that looked whole. We moved into the reception hall, the clink of silverware and soft music filling the air. The tables were beautifully set. The cake stood in the corner like a piece of art, and yet all I could see was the absence. Even in a room full of people who cared for me, the gap was loud, unmissable. Noah squeezed my hand under the table, and I exhaled slowly, storing away every ounce of composure I could muster, because somewhere deep down I already knew. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the first chapter. 8 months before the wedding, I sat at my mother's kitchen table in Portland with a cup of coffee going cold between my hands. The morning light poured in through the big bay window, catching on the dust motes in the air. I told her the date Noah and I had chosen for the wedding, October 14th, and she smiled in that polite way she used for acquaintances more than her own daughter. "We'll make it work," she said. And I remember a faint warmth in my chest, a flicker of hope that maybe this time they would show up for me. A month later, my phone buzzed with a family group text. Olivia had sent a photo of a vineyard in Napa Valley, rows of golden vines under a sunset sky, along with her announcement. Engagement party, October 14th, at Sterling Crest Winery. My stomach dropped before my mind could even do the math. The exact same day. I stared at the screen, waiting for someone to chime in and say there had been a mix-up, that surely she didn't mean that date. Instead, the thread filled with congratulations, little heart emojis, and plans for flights to California. I called my mother that night. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and airy, as if she were expecting good news. I asked her if she had seen Olivia's message. "Yes," she said, "isn't it wonderful?" I told her it was the same day as my wedding, the date we had already given her. There was a pause just long enough to sting before she said, "Olivia booked it first, honey. You can always change your date." The words landed heavy and cold. I reminded her we had put down deposits sent save the dates. She sighed like I was making things complicated. "It's only a date, Evelyn. You'll understand." That night I lay awake next to Noah, the sound of traffic on Burnside Street drifting through the half-open window. He reached for my hand and told me we didn't have to change anything if we didn't want to. But the silence from my father in the days after spoke louder than any text or phone call. No defense of me, no suggestion that maybe Olivia could adjust. Just the quiet confirmation that their choice had already been made. I tried to convince myself that maybe it wasn't personal. Maybe the vineyard had only that one day available. Maybe my mother had forgotten the exact date. But deep down I knew better. Olivia had a way of taking what she wanted when she wanted it, and my parents had a way of letting her. This wasn't new. This was just the most blatant. One evening a week after that call, I sat with my father in his study, the scent of pipe tobacco lingering in the air. I asked him directly if he thought it was fair. He didn't look up from the book he was holding. "Life isn't about fair," he said. "It's about priorities." And then he turned the page, as if that was the end of the conversation. That was when the space between us shifted into something I wasn't sure could be crossed again. In the months that followed, wedding planning became a split-screen life. On one side, Noah and I were meeting with our florist tasting cake samples, finalizing the guest list. On the other, my phone buzzed constantly with group chat updates about Olivia's event. Dress fittings in San Francisco, wine pairings with the caterer, a DJ flying in from New York. My own mother once sent a message meant for someone else to the wrong thread, gushing about how Olivia's day will be so elegant. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. There were moments I considered postponing, just to avoid the ache of knowing most of my family would be toasting Olivia while I said my vows. But every time I brought it up, Noah would take my face in his hands and remind me that our wedding was about us, not them. I clung to that, but it didn't stop the quiet hurt from threading through everything I did. Even picking out my dress felt like something I was doing in the shadow of another celebration. By late summer, the divide was complete. My parents never asked about our plans again. They never offered to help, never asked what time the ceremony would be. Instead, every interaction was laced with news about Olivia. It was almost impressive the way they could erase my wedding from their narrative as if it didn't exist. And yet on the nights I couldn't sleep, I would replay my mother's voice in my head, the cool certainty when she told me to change my date, as if my day was nothing more than a placeholder. It was in those sleepless hours that the shape of something else began to form in my mind. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew I wouldn't let it pass unnoticed, because there was a line between being overlooked and being erased, and they had just stepped over it. When I think about how easily they could push me aside, my mind drifts back to a birthday in Portland when I turned 12. The living room was strung with paper streamers, the cake sat half-cut on the table, and I was in the middle of unwrapping a book I had been begging for when my mother's voice cut through the chatter. "We have to leave now, or we'll be late for Olivia's recital." The room shifted instantly. My father stood, my mother gathered her coat, and guests began stacking plates and clearing cups. My half-eaten slice of cake was left on the counter, the candle wax still clinging to the frosting. I remember sitting in the back seat as we drove across town to the Portland Conservatory, the gift bag still in my lap. My dress itched, my stomach ached, and all I could think about was how the party had vanished in a blink. By the time we reached the concert hall, the smell of my birthday candles had already faded, replaced by the polished wood and sheet music scent of Olivia's world. She was in a white dress, her hair pinned up in curls, and when she saw me, she smiled like I was just another guest in her spotlight. After the performance, while everyone swarmed her with flowers and praise, I stood by the vending machines in the lobby sipping a Sprite. My grandmother, who had come in from Eugene, found me there. She pressed a small velvet box into my hands. Inside was a delicate gold chain, with a sapphire pendant that caught the light like a piece of the sky. It had been hers when she was my age. I had never held anything so beautiful. I wore it for the rest of the evening, my fingers tracing the cool stone, imagining all the birthdays I would keep it close. A week later, my mother knocked on my bedroom door. She said she needed to take the necklace to keep it safe. I asked why I couldn't just keep it in my jewelry box. She smiled in that patient way she used when she thought I was being naive. "It's too valuable, Evelyn. I'll put it somewhere secure." I handed it over because I thought I would get it back. Weeks passed, then months, and whenever I asked, she would say it was put away for a special occasion. Eventually, I stopped asking, but I never stopped noticing the empty space in my jewelry box. Growing up, Olivia's achievements were framed and displayed in the hallway. Her piano trophies lined the mantel, her certificates covered the corkboard in my father's office. When I made the varsity soccer team in high school, my parents congratulated me at dinner, then reminded me that sports were fun, but wouldn't take me as far as music had taken Olivia. When I brought home a straight-A report card, my mother said I should learn how Olivia balanced her academics with her music schedule. Every win I had was an opportunity for them to tell me how I could be more like her. It was never just the big moments. At Thanksgiving, if Olivia offered to set the table, my father would brag about how thoughtful she was. If I did it, it was expected. When she got into the University of Washington, my parents threw a party. When I was accepted into Oregon State with a partial scholarship, my mother nodded and asked if I had looked into transferring after a year. It was as if Olivia's path was the family's investment portfolio, and mine was a side project they didn't expect to yield much. The older I got, the more I noticed the choreography of it all. How Olivia would mention something she wanted, and within weeks it would appear. How family gatherings shifted to accommodate her schedule, her needs, her whims. When I visited from college one winter break, I found my old room had been converted into a music library for Olivia's compositions. My belongings were in boxes in the garage. No one had asked me. It was just assumed I wouldn't mind. The necklace was the thing I thought about most, though. On nights when I felt invisible, I would imagine finding it again, the weight of it against my skin, proof that something meant for me could still be mine. Over the years, I saw flashes of it at odd times. Once at a New Year's Eve party, when Olivia bent to kiss someone on the cheek, and the sapphire caught the light beneath her scarf. Another time in a photo on social media, the chain just visible against the collar of her sweater. Every sighting was a reminder that my grandmother's gift hadn't been lost or stored away. It had been claimed. The memory of those moments wasn't just about the necklace. It was the pattern they represented, the way my life seemed to orbit around hers, whether I wanted it to or not. Sitting in my apartment now with the October rain tapping against the window, I realized that nothing about what had happened with the wedding date was an accident. It was part of the same script I had been living in since I was 12. Only this time, I wasn't content to stand in the lobby sipping a soda while everyone else gathered around her. The music in the reception hall was soft, the kind of gentle piano track meant to fill the air without demanding attention. I was halfway through a conversation with one of Noah's cousins when my phone vibrated inside my clutch. I excused myself, stepping toward the corner near the windows where the light from the chandeliers didn't quite reach. It was a message from Amelia, my oldest friend, and the person who had somehow managed to be both my maid of honor and my legal sounding board through all of this. The preview showed a photo, and something in me braced before I tapped it open. The image bloomed on the screen, sharp and bright. Olivia stood in the courtyard of a sprawling Napa Valley estate, her hair swept up in a perfect twist, champagne in one hand. Around her neck, glinting under the fairy lights, was the sapphire necklace. My necklace. The deep blue stone caught the camera's flash, sending a streak of light straight into my chest. For a moment, I forgot where I was. The sound of clinking glasses and low laughter faded, replaced by the hollow thud of my heartbeat. My knees felt unsteady, so I reached for the back of an empty chair. I zoomed in on the photo, as if the closer I looked, the more it might prove me wrong. But there was no mistaking it. The chain was the same delicate gold, the clasp slightly worn on one side. The sapphire oval cut framed by tiny diamonds sat just below the hollow of her throat. It had been missing from my life for more than a decade, and now it was smiling for the camera at my sister's engagement party. Amelia's text followed a second later. "Thought you should see this." I stared at the words until they blurred. My throat tightened, a hot wave of anger rising beneath the weight of something older and heavier. This wasn't just about a piece of jewelry. It was about every moment I'd been told to step aside, every celebration cut short, every reminder that Olivia's wants came before my own. And now, on the day I was supposed to be the center of my own story, she was wearing the one thing I had once believed was truly mine. I typed back a single word. Got it. Then I locked my phone and slid it back into my clutch, pressing the clasp until it clicked. My hands felt cold, but my mind was sparking in a way that was almost steadying. The reception continued around me. People dancing, waiters weaving between tables with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Noah found me near the window, a crease between his eyebrows. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded once because this wasn't the place for explanations, but I could see the question lingering in his eyes. Dinner was served, and I moved through the courses like a ghost, smiling when expected, answering questions automatically. Every so often my thoughts slipped back to that photo, to the way the sapphire had caught the light. I imagined Olivia laughing in that courtyard, completely unaware that Amelia had caught her in the middle of her little performance. The image replayed in my mind, and each time it felt less like a shock and more like a piece clicking into place. When the cake was cut and the first dances were over, I stepped out onto the terrace to breathe. The night air was cool, scented with roses from the planters along the railing. I pulled my phone from my clutch again, scrolling back to Amelia's message. I saved the photo to a folder I kept for important documents, the same one where I stored copies of our wedding contracts and vendor receipts. Then I typed a quick note to her. "Keep everything. Don't delete." She responded almost immediately. "Already backed up." I leaned against the railing, my fingers tapping lightly against the metal, as I thought about the years that necklace had been out of my reach. I had believed my mother's story about keeping it safe. I had believed it might return to me someday. But there it was, paraded around like another prize in Olivia's collection on a night chosen specifically to overlap with mine. The ache of being abandoned at my wedding, twisted tighter with the sting of seeing something stolen, brought out into the open. Voices drifted through the open doors, pulling me back inside. I rejoined Noah, sliding into the seat beside him as a new song began. My smile was back in place, but my mind was elsewhere. There was a difference between losing something and having it taken from you. Tonight had made that difference clear, and the photo in my phone was proof. Proof I would hold on to. Proof I knew exactly where to find. Back in Seattle, the first thing I did after unpacking my dress was walk straight to the closet in our bedroom. In the far corner behind a stack of winter coats sat the small gray safe Noah and I used for documents that mattered. I keyed in the code, the door clicking open with a sound that felt louder than it should in the quiet room. Inside, stacked neatly in labeled folders, was the file from my grandfather's estate. My hands shook a little as I pulled it out and carried it to the bed. I sat cross-legged on the comforter, flipping through the pages, until I found the one I had been thinking about since seeing that photograph. The will, dated March 12, 2018, signed in my grandfather's sharp, deliberate handwriting. My eyes went straight to the line near the bottom. The gold sapphire necklace shall belong to my granddaughter, Evelyn Carter. Seeing it in black and white hit me with a mix of relief and fury. It wasn't just my word against hers. It was written, witnessed, and legally binding. Noah came in leaning on the doorframe with his jacket still on. "Did you find it?" I held up the page. "This is it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He walked over, scanning the text, his brow furrowing. "Well, that's clear." He sat beside me and took my free hand. "So what do you want to do?" I didn't have to think long. "I want it back." He nodded once, no hesitation. "Then we get someone who knows exactly how to make that happen." The next morning, I called Amelia. She answered on the first ring, her tone shifting from casual to all business when I told her what I had. "Bring it over," she said. "We'll go over everything." At her downtown office, she cleared a space on her desk, laying the will flat beside the printed photo of Olivia at the vineyard. She studied them both like puzzle pieces. "This is good," she said, tapping the will, "but we'll need more. We should get an appraisal to establish value, confirm the piece's identity, and document that it's the same necklace from your grandfather's estate." She already had a name for a certified appraiser in Bellevue. We made an appointment for later that week. In the meantime, Amelia drafted a preliminary plan. Step 1, gather proof of ownership. Step 2, confirm current value. Step 3, prepare a demand letter to Olivia, giving her the option to return it before we proceed to litigation. Her voice was calm, but edged with precision, the way it always got when she was focused. "This isn't about sentiment in the eyes of the law," she reminded me. "It's about property rights, and you have them." 2 days later, Noah and I drove to the appraiser's office. The place was tucked into the corner of a brick building near the marina, its windows filled with antique silver and ornate clocks. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood. The appraiser, a man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses, examined the photos Amelia had sent and cross-referenced them with the original estate inventory. He took out a folder from his records, flipping to a page that matched the description perfectly. Based on market trends and the quality of the sapphire, he valued it at $85,000. Hearing the number out loud made my stomach tighten. It wasn't just priceless to me. It was an asset, a legacy. When we left, the sun was setting over the water, streaks of orange and pink stretching across the Sound. I clutched the folder with the appraisal like it might disappear if I let go. In the car, Noah glanced at me. "You okay?" I exhaled slowly. "Better than I have in a long time." It was the first time in years I felt like the balance might tip in my favor. Back at home, I scanned the appraisal and emailed it to Amelia. Within an hour, she replied with a draft of the demand letter. The language was formal, deliberate. It cited the will, the appraisal, and the photographic evidence. It gave Olivia 14 days to return the necklace before legal action would be taken. Reading it over, I felt that same cool steadiness I'd felt the night of my wedding when I saved the photo. Only now it was sharpened with the knowledge that the law was on my side. I printed a copy and set it on my desk, the words standing out against the white paper like a quiet promise. For the first time, the sapphire didn't feel lost to me. It felt within reach. 2 days later, I got a text from Matt Harris. It had been years since we'd spoken beyond the occasional social media comment, but there he was congratulating me on the wedding and asking if we could grab coffee sometime. Matt had been a fixture in my high school years, the guy who helped me find my first photography studio rental when I was just starting out. Back then, he had a knack for connecting people and making things happen. Nostalgia softened me, and I agreed to meet him at a cafe in Capitol Hill. He was already at a corner table when I arrived, leaning back with that same easy smile I remembered. We traded updates, the conversation weaving between old classmates and our current work. At one point, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "If you ever need help with anything seriously, just say the word." I hesitated for a moment, then mentioned carefully that I was dealing with a legal matter involving a piece of family property. I didn't go into details, but I let slip enough for him to understand it was important and personal. He nodded, his expression unreadable, and the subject drifted to other things. We said goodbye with a friendly hug, and I left feeling a little lighter, like maybe reconnecting with someone from my past was a good thing. That feeling lasted exactly 4 days. I was in my office when Amelia called. Her voice was clipped, the way it got when she was forcing herself to stay calm. "We have a problem." She explained that certain details from our plan, the appraisal value, the demand letter deadline, had somehow made their way to Olivia's side of the family. They were already strategizing around it, talking to their own attorneys. My stomach dropped. How could they know that? It didn't take Amelia long to find the thread. A mutual contact had mentioned hearing about the necklace dispute from Matt, who claimed he was trying to help smooth things over. But then came the part that made my chest go cold. Olivia's parents had offered him the exclusive listing on a waterfront property. They were preparing to sell a deal worth hundreds of thousands in commission in exchange for keeping them informed. I sat back in my chair staring at the wall. Of all the people to sell me out, it had to be someone who once helped me get my start. I replayed our coffee meeting in my head, every nod, every casual question. He hadn't been reconnecting out of nostalgia. He'd been fishing. That night, Noah found me in the living room, the appraisal folder spread open on the coffee table. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening more with each sentence. "So he sold you out for a paycheck." I nodded, feeling the words lodge in my throat. Noah reached over and closed the folder. "Then we lock this down. No one else gets a single detail unless it's you, me, or Amelia." The next morning I called Amelia and told her we were going into full lockdown. She agreed immediately. From now on, all communication about the case would be direct, secure, and between the three of us only. No friendly updates, no casual mentions, not even to people I thought I could trust. I deleted Matt's number from my phone and removed him from every contact list that mattered. Later that week, a bouquet of flowers showed up at my studio with a card that said, "Sorry for the misunderstanding." No signature, but I didn't need one. I dropped them straight into the trash without reading another word. Some lines once crossed couldn't be uncrossed. By the weekend, the anger had settled into something sharper, more focused. I wasn't just fighting for a necklace anymore. I was fighting to keep control of the narrative, to make sure no one else had the power to twist it. And if that meant cutting out pieces of my past, so be it. It started with a post on a local neighborhood forum. Someone claiming to be a friend of the family wrote that I was jealous of my sister's engagement and had made up a story about a necklace just to ruin her celebration. Within hours, the comments piled up, strangers debating my character like they knew me. A few even shared grainy screenshots from my wedding, pointing out the empty seats, as if that alone proved I was the problem. By the next morning, a thread on a popular Seattle community group was making the rounds. It painted me as unstable, vengeful, someone who couldn't stand her younger sister's success. Reading it felt like pressing on a bruise, but I knew better than to jump in and defend myself there. That was what they wanted, an emotional outburst they could point to later. Instead, I called Amelia. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "We go on offense. Sophie Miller owes me a favor. She's sharp, fair, and she doesn't back down from family politics stories." I agreed instantly. Sophie had covered several inheritance disputes in the past, and her reporting had a way of cutting through gossip like a scalpel. That afternoon, I met Amelia at her office with a flash drive. On it were high-resolution scans of my grandfather's will, the notarized appraisal, and a photo from my 12th birthday, my grandmother clasping the sapphire necklace around my neck, while I grinned with cake frosting on my chin. We added the now infamous shot of Olivia at her engagement party, the necklace catching the vineyard lights like it belonged in an auction catalog. Sophie came by in person. She asked direct questions, her pen moving steadily across a yellow legal pad. She wanted dates, witnesses, any proof that could stand up to scrutiny. I answered everything. When she left, she had copies of every document along with my permission to publish them in full. 2 days later, her article went live on the Seattle Chronicle's website. The headline was "Precise, Inherited Sapphire at Center of Carter Family Dispute Raises Questions of Favoritism and Property Rights." The lead photo was my grandmother and me, not Olivia. Sophie laid out the facts, citing the will verbatim and including commentary from an estate law expert who confirmed my legal claim. She didn't shy away from describing the pattern of favoritism toward Olivia, backing it with examples I had shared. The reaction was immediate. The same community groups that had been mocking me now had threads dissecting the article. Some people admitted they'd been wrong. Others doubled down. But their comments were drowned out by those asking why my family had skipped my wedding to attend my sister's engagement. For the first time, the tide of public opinion wasn't entirely against me. Meanwhile, Amelia was already moving on the legal front. She had me sign off on a full packet to file in King County Superior Court if Olivia ignored the demand letter. The package included the will, the appraisal, Sophie's article, and a sworn affidavit from my grandmother's former caregiver confirming the necklace's intended ownership. In the middle of all this, Olivia's fiancé Daniel tried to reach out through a mutual acquaintance. The message was simple: if I dropped the matter publicly, they'd consider returning the necklace after their wedding. I didn't bother replying. Consider wasn't good enough. The night Sophie's article hit its peak in online shares, I sat on my balcony with Noah, the city lights flickering below us. He scrolled through his phone and handed it to me. "Look at this," he said. Someone had taken a screenshot of Olivia at her engagement party and posted it side by side with the photo of my grandmother fastening the necklace on me, captioned with one-word receipts. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't the only one telling my story. We had the law on one side and the truth documented and undeniable on the other. The noise was still out there, but it no longer felt like it could bury me. It felt like the beginning of something I could actually win. Amelia moved quickly. The demand letter went out by courier the next morning, printed on heavy cream stock, with her firm's letterhead in deep blue ink. It was concise, factual, and impossible to misinterpret. 14 days to return the sapphire necklace along with a certified appraisal and a copy of my grandfather's will attached. The final paragraph stated clearly that failure to comply would result in immediate legal action in the appropriate jurisdiction. By the third day, a reply arrived not from Olivia or my parents, but from a Portland law firm I didn't recognize. Their letter was colder than the November rain streaking my office window. They denied all allegations, insisted the necklace had been gifted to Olivia years earlier, and accused me of making publicly damaging claims that bordered on defamation. Amelia read it once, tossed it back onto my desk, and said, "Then we file." Filing meant stepping into a new arena. The paperwork was thick, each page a blend of legal language and carefully curated evidence. My name in bold letters as the plaintiff felt heavier than I expected. By the end of the week, the case was officially lodged with the Civil Division of the Multnomah County Courthouse in Portland. That night, Noah made dinner while I sat at the kitchen island scrolling through local news. I almost dropped my phone when I saw the headline on the Oregon Daily Bulletin: Inheritance Battle Over Heirloom Sapphire Lands in Court. The article quoted from Sophie's piece referenced the will, and even included a line about the unusual family dynamic that had left the plaintiff's side empty at her own wedding. Within hours, the story was picked up by a Portland evening news segment. They aired the photograph of my grandmother and me, the same one Sophie had used, and contrasted it with a blurred shot of Olivia from her engagement party. Watching it on TV was surreal, like my life had been lifted out of my control and projected onto a screen for strangers to dissect. Olivia's side did not take it well. The next morning, a post appeared on her Instagram, a filtered black and white photo of her hand on Daniel's chest, the necklace just barely visible. The caption read, "Some things are priceless." The comments split into two camps, some gushing support, others asking pointed questions about the lawsuit. Amelia's phone buzzed nonstop for the next 2 days, with inquiries from other reporters. We turned down most of them, agreeing only to one radio interview where she stuck to the facts and avoided personal jabs. It was about the law, not the drama. She reminded me, though, the drama was clearly what kept people watching. Meanwhile, the pressure on Olivia's family began to show. A real estate blog reported that one of their development projects had quietly lost a major investor. A source claimed it was because the investor didn't want to be associated with a public legal dispute. I couldn't verify it, but it didn't surprise me. Reputation was currency in their world, and ours was now a headline war. One evening, I walked past a wine bar in Capitol Hill and caught sight of two women leaning over a phone whispering. I didn't have to guess which story they were reading. For once, I didn't look away. Let them see me. Let them know I wasn't hiding. By the end of the second week, Amelia confirmed that the court date for the preliminary hearing had been set for early February. 14 days had come and gone without compliance. The demand letter had done its job. It had drawn the line in ink, and now both sides were stepping over it. I closed the calendar on my desk and took a deep breath. There was no going back. Olivia's wedding date had been set for months, the kind of meticulously planned affair that made the society pages in Napa Valley. The guest list was dripping with names that opened doors, the venue a resort so exclusive, you had to know someone to even tour it. To me, it was more than a spectacle. It was the perfect stage. If the necklace appeared there in public and in defiance of the pending lawsuit, I would have my moment to strike. Amelia was the one who made the first call to the resort. She didn't waste time with receptionists or event coordinators. She went straight to the general manager, Logan Reed, a man whose name carried weight in the luxury hospitality world. I sat across from her in her office as she put the call on speaker. Logan's voice was smooth, polite, and dismissive all at once. He explained that the resort did not get involved in personal disputes between guests, and that any guest's attire or jewelry was their private business. Amelia didn't raise her voice, but I saw the shift in her eyes. She told him about the civil case, reciting the docket number and the current status in court. She mentioned the appraisal value of the necklace and the explicit terms of my grandfather's will. He still hesitated, his tone hardening slightly. That's when Amelia went in for the pressure point. She brought up the liability clause buried in their event insurance policy, the one that made the venue financially responsible if they knowingly allowed a guest to display property that was part of an active legal dispute, especially if its display caused reputational or financial harm. There was a pause. Then Logan asked for documentation. Amelia slid a file across her desk toward me and kept talking, promising to email him the court filings and a notarized copy of the appraisal within the hour. By the end of the call, his tone had shifted from dismissive to measured. He said he would review the matter with counsel and get back to us. 2 days later, he did. His email was short but clear. While the resort could not actively police personal property, if Olivia appeared on their grounds wearing the disputed necklace, they reserved the right to request its removal to avoid exposure to legal claims. It was the leverage we needed. Noah read the email over my shoulder and let out a low whistle. That's as close to a win as you can get without setting foot in court. I knew better than to call it a win, but it was a line in the sand, and now Logan Reed was holding the pen. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I pictured the moment over and over. Olivia sweeping into the venue with that necklace glittering under the chandeliers, cameras flashing only to be stopped mid-entrance by staff who would politely but firmly ask her to remove it. The image was intoxicating. Still, there was the matter of timing. We didn't want to tip our hand too early, so Amelia and I kept our communication with the resort minimal, confirming only the essentials. Logan assured us he would brief his senior staff privately, and that no one outside his management circle would know until the day of the event. On the morning of the wedding, I woke before dawn. My phone was already buzzing with notifications, social media posts from guests arriving in Napa, photos of champagne breakfasts, the kind of curated pre-wedding frenzy Olivia thrived on. I stayed quiet online, not even opening the apps. My role was not to be seen until the moment mattered. Amelia called mid-morning. She was already in Napa, blending in as a guest of a friend who lived nearby. She told me the venue staff had their instructions and that Logan himself was on site overseeing the event. It was a small detail, but it mattered. He wouldn't delegate this to someone who might flinch. By the time I hung up, I felt the steady hum of adrenaline under my skin. It wasn't nervousness exactly. It was readiness. The kind of calm that comes when you know the next move is already set, and all you have to do is wait for the board to turn in your favor. The sun spilled gold over the rolling vineyards as we pulled into the gravel drive of the resort. From the outside, it looked like a dream, a fairy tale setting framed by rows of grapevines and the gleam of glass-paneled halls. Inside, the air carried the scent of roses and champagne. Noah walked beside me, his hand a steady weight at the small of my back, as we took the side entrance Amelia had arranged. We were not there to mingle or be seen, not yet. I spotted Amelia near the terrace, dressed in muted navy, her hair pinned up in a way that made her look like any other guest. In her hand was a slim folder, sealed in a transparent sleeve, the kind that made you notice it without needing to ask. She gave me the smallest nod before disappearing into the crowd. Guests drifted toward the main lawn where rows of white chairs curved toward a flower-laden arch. The buzz of conversation was thick, punctuated by laughter and the clink of glasses. I stayed toward the back, just inside the open French doors, where I could see without being seen. Then the music swelled, heads turned. Olivia stepped out from the far wing of the building, her gown catching the sunlight in a halo of silk. And there it was, the gold chain, the deep blue sapphire gleaming like it had been waiting for this exact spotlight. My breath caught, but not from surprise. Logan moved almost instantly. He emerged from the side of the aisle in a tailored gray suit, his stride calm but unyielding. The guests nearest him looked puzzled, their chatter softening to a murmur. He reached Olivia at the edge of the aisle, leaning in so only she could hear. Her shoulders stiffened, her smile faltered. From where I stood, I could see Amelia step forward, folder in hand. Logan gestured subtly toward her. Olivia's gaze snapped to Amelia, then to me in the shadows, as if confirming the source of the intrusion. Her face flushed deep crimson, a stark contrast to the white silk framing it. The moment stretched thin. Guests shifted in their seats, a few, raising their phones, sensing something was off. Logan extended his hand, palm up. Olivia's fingers brushed her collarbone, clutching the chain like it might anchor her. But Logan's voice, low and even, left no room for refusal. With a sharp exhale, she reached behind her neck. The clasp gave with a soft metallic click, the sapphire swinging free. She dropped it into Logan's hand without meeting his eyes. The crowd murmured whispers running like a current through the rows. Logan slipped the necklace into an inner pocket of his jacket, his expression as neutral as if he were carrying a pen. He gave Olivia a brief nod and stepped aside, allowing the music to resume as though nothing had happened. But nothing was the same. From my vantage point, I caught the flicker of cameras' phones lifted discreetly, a photographer's lens tilting toward the exchange. Amelia remained still, her hands now clasped in front of her, the folder gone. Olivia walked the rest of the aisle with a brittle smile, her eyes avoiding every face. The guests clapped politely, but the rhythm was uneven, laced with curiosity. Whatever perfection she had planned for this day now carried a fracture everyone had seen. I stayed in the shadow of the doorway, the cool breeze from the vineyards brushing against my skin. It wasn't triumph exactly, not yet, but it was the first visible crack in the wall they had built around me. And cracks, I knew, only grew wider. By the next morning, the first clips had already surfaced online. A 15-second video from someone in the third row caught the exact moment Olivia's hand unclasped the chain and placed it into Logan's palm. Another clip, shakier, but from closer up, caught the look on her face. Both were already circulating on Instagram and TikTok, gathering thousands of comments, dissecting every frame. By noon, local wedding blogs had picked it up. By evening, the San Francisco Chronicle ran a piece not about the ceremony, but about the public removal of a disputed heirloom. The next day, my mother's name appeared in an entirely different headline. A luxury hotel group in San Francisco announced they were terminating her consulting contract, citing reputational risk. It was the kind of severance you couldn't spin into a graceful exit, no matter how carefully you worded the press release. I didn't have to wonder how Olivia was handling it. A contact of Amelia's in Napa told her the honeymoon had been called off. Olivia's in-laws had demanded a sit-down meeting to discuss what had happened not in private, but with their entire family present. In their circles, embarrassment was as costly as a lawsuit. Matt didn't escape either. Word spread in Portland's real estate community that he had been caught feeding confidential information to a client's adversary. The deal with Olivia's family fell apart instantly, but the real blow came when one of his biggest commercial clients pulled out of a pending sale. No one wanted to be in business with someone whose loyalty could be bought. I watched it all from the quiet of our kitchen in Seattle. Noah scrolled through updates on his phone while Amelia read the latest email from the courthouse about our pending case. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, grounding me in a calm that felt unfamiliar after months of tension. We didn't talk much about Napa. We didn't need to. Every headline, every pulled contract, every canceled trip was its own punctuation mark. The narrative was no longer theirs to control. When it was time to leave, we packed the car without ceremony. Amelia loaded her briefcase into the back seat, while Noah checked the route out of the valley. The air outside was sharp with the scent of ripening grapes, the resort behind us gleaming in the afternoon sun like nothing had happened. But we knew better. The fracture was already widening, and there was nothing they could do to seal it. We drove north in silence, the road unwinding ahead of us each mile, putting more distance between us and the wreckage we had left behind. A year later, the air in Seattle carried that same crisp edge it had on our wedding day. But this time, there was no emptiness waiting for me. Our home was filled with warmth, laughter, and the soft hum of people who chose to be here. Friends gathered around the dining table, passing dishes, trading stories, and filling every corner with the sound of belonging. After the last guest left, Noah disappeared into our bedroom and returned holding a small velvet box. He set it in my hands without a word. My fingers hesitated for a moment before I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of deep blue fabric, was the sapphire necklace. The gold gleamed as if it had been waiting all these years for this exact moment. I felt my breath catch. Carefully, I picked it up, the metal cool against my skin. The light from the lamp caught the sapphire, scattering flecks of blue across my palm. For a second, I could almost see my grandmother standing beside me, her gentle smile and knowing eyes telling me she had always meant for this to be mine. Noah moved behind me and fastened the clasp at the nape of my neck. The weight settled against my collarbone, not heavy, but grounding, a reminder that some things once restored carry a new kind of strength. I met his gaze in the mirror and saw pride there, not for the victory over my family, but for the fact that I had fought for something that mattered. We stood together in that quiet moment, the hum of the city in the distance, the scent of the last autumn rain drifting through the open window. I thought about everything it had taken to get here, the lines crossed, the betrayals endured, the moments I had wanted to walk away. And yet here I was, not just with the necklace, but with the unshakable truth of who stood beside me. Family, I realized, was not defined by the people who shared your blood. It was defined by the ones who respected your worth, who showed up, who fought for you, even when it was inconvenient. It was built by choice, not obligation. I reached up and touched the sapphire, feeling its smooth surface under my fingertips. It no longer felt like a relic of a stolen childhood. It felt like a promise I had kept to myself. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Stand up for what is rightfully yours, even when the ones standing against you are the people you once called family. Protect your value, protect your dignity, because those are the things no one can give back once they are taken. And remember, the family you choose will always be stronger than the one that tries to break you.